Hello, my name is Charlotte Bell, and today I will be giving a talk on Women Without a Man, Deity Dedications and Female Agency in Roman Britain. Now, before we get ahead into the talk itself, let me give you a bit of a background on me. I'm doing a PhD at the University of Liverpool, and my thesis focuses on the misrepresentation of women in Roman Britain. I'm looking at a mortuary comparative model between female burials in late Iron Age Britain and Romano-British female burials and funerary inscriptions. My aim is to look at the role women played in Romano-British society and whether that correlates with the archaeological evidence that we have. So, as part of my thesis, I have been looking at funerary inscriptions. However, I've started to delve into the archaeological evidence that we have for female deity dedications. So, without further ado, we will start with the talk. So, my purpose today is to use deity dedications to look at the role women played within society. So the challenge in using inscriptions at all really is the domestic representation they typically portray. So we see a lot of associations with men through their role as wife, as daughter, as mother. So we're looking at a very strategic connection with men. And so we're really not finding their activities in society. It's very much connected to their place within the family. Um, and so my purpose is to look at these deity inscriptions and use a prosopographic approach. Prosopography is the study of names. So through the study of names, we can find out more information about the identities of these women. We can look at their ethnic backgrounds, the meaning of their names, and whether that matched up with the domestic portrayal we typically see in scholarly interpretation of women. Not only that, but we can also look at their occupation and their activities, which, although typically is not portrayed in the inscriptions, there are some examples of the reason why these women came to dedicate to these deities. So really my purpose is to illustrate some form of female agency, if there were any, to look at the diversity of their identities through the prosopographic approach, and ultimately to look at see whether women had an active role within Romano-British society away from the presence of men. So that's my purpose for today's talk. So to begin with, let's look at gender norms and let's look at typically what we see in the representation of women, specifically in Roman Britain. As I said before, they are very much associated with the family through their role as a mother and a wife, primarily, but also as a daughter. This is typically seen in funerary inscriptions where possibly the female has died young and did not have the opportunity to marry or to have family herself. So although we do see the role of daughter, this is not to the degree that we see it for wives and for widows. So straight away we're looking at funerary inscriptions and seeing a lot of domesticity. And that really plays into our own assumptions and interpretations of Romano-British women. That we are looking at domestic women, and therefore we should look for that type of women everywhere else in the archaeological record. And so this brings us to the interpretation of archaeological finds. Typically in mortuary settings, in burial deposits, we will find a gravegoods assemblage. And a lot of these objects have been interpreted solely in connection to their sex, to their identity as a woman. For example, spindle whorls. I've previously given a talk on spindle whorls here at Liverpool, and really identified the fact that this object cannot be exclusively associated with women. We have archaeological evidence for male use of spindle whorls, that we have objects which have been inscribed on them by men, so they're attributing ownership of these spindle whorls. And it's not the case of they had made the spindle whorls, but they actually owned them and used them themselves. The location of these spindle whorls that we're finding in situ typically are at military forts. We're not finding a huge amount of them in burial deposits. A lot of them are being found in bathhouses and at Roman forts themselves. So the interpretation of gravegoods is really being connected to the portrayal of domestic women. We see this also in jewellery, in different materials of jewellery such as jet, which can be helpful if we have an unsexed skeleton. It can help us to interpret their sex. However, we have a lot of male Romano-British deposits with earrings as well. So it's really difficult to genderise these objects in the gravegoods assemblage. So the mortuary interpretation of ritualism, when we come across a burial deposit with a sexed female, or maybe it hasn't been sexed at all, and the gravegoods assemblage includes typically perceived male and female objects. If the skeleton is sexed female and we're seeing, for instance, a bronze mirror and a sword, so the mirrors are very typically associated with females. That is archaeologically evident. We do not find any mirror burials with a sexed male, so we can confidently say that that is a female gravegood. However, the burial at Briarha that we have found is an Iron Age burial on the Isle of Scilly. The skeleton was unsexed and had included a very impressive sword and a mirror, which a lot of interpretation resounded that with ritualism, and this kind of removes the female agency aspect of the burial. So if a female skeleton is showing male and female attributes through the gravegoods assemblage, then that must be ritualism. It cannot be due to female agency. I say that sarcastically, of course. So we're seeing the removal of agency from women because it conflicts with our own interpretation of domestic women. So that's something to think about. Lastly, we're seeing a lack of deviation from gendered heteronormativity. So we're looking in terms of queer theory, and we're looking at the assumptions of Romano-British women. So that is also something to take into account. The sexed skeletons, well, the unsexed skeletons, if the skeleton has been preserved, may show both male and female skeletal attributes. And so a huge amount of the archaeological population is being discounted due to the both male and female attributes of the skeleton. So let's move on. So I've given you a background of the issues that we come across when we look at the interpretation of Romano-British women. So I'd like to make you aware of the author data set. We have a lovely pie chart here to illustrate what I'm going to tell you. Currently, there are 28 female deity dedications in Roman Britain. Now that may seem more than what you would have expected, but that has been diligently researched by myself. So there are 28 female deity dedications. When we look a bit deeper into these inscriptions, we can see that 18 of those 28 inscriptions are demonstrating a male absence. Now this may be through their identity as a wife or as a daughter in the inscription, or it could be the lack of a male. So there'll be some inscriptions with both the male and the female is dedicating together as a couple, as a married couple, or as a brother or sister. So 18 of those inscriptions are showing that females are dedicating solely by themselves, which is, when you look deeper into these dedications, is quite a result to come across. There are, as a result, a large number of single female dedications. If you look at this pie chart, 64% of these dedications are erected by females on their own. If you look at the pie chart, the 29% are male and female. So considering the funerary inscriptions data, where we would expect to see a lot of females clearly referencing males within an inscription, it is to be expected. There are female groups that are dedicating to deities. This is seen at a lesser rate, at 7%, and this is typically erected by mother and daughter. There are inscriptions where the relationship is unknown, so we cannot really say what their relationship was to one another. However, I think the most important takeaway from this is the huge amount of single female dedications, which is very much unexpected. So we have the author data set here, and what I'd like to bring your attention to is, although there was a huge amount of single females dedicating to a deity, the association to males was clearly there. You can see in the inscription by Socia Janкina, which is rib 644, she is referenced in the inscription as the wife of Quintus Antonius Isauricus. What's interesting about that one is that he is demonstrating his trianomina, so we can see that he is a Roman citizen, so it may be that she was in quite an advantageous relationship and lifestyle as a result. She had dedicated to Fortune and was based in York, and this one has been dated to AD 130. A lot of these dedications unfortunately cannot be dated, but that one can confidently be dated to 130, which is relatively early in the Romano-British period. Romano-British period started in AD 43, so it's relatively early in that. And we can also see, if you look at rib 813, Iana Hermione, she is referenced as the daughter of Quintus, and she had dedicated both to Jupiter and Emperor. We can see two different inscriptions there, and she was based at Maryport. Unfortunately, it has been undated. And we also have the wife of Fabius, which, if I can try and find that one, wife of Fabius, I believe that's on, no, that's not on the second one. Okay, it's not on the second page there, but we have that there. And we also have Carotica, daughter of Euetus, and also Vibia Pacta, which you can see on the current slide. She was the wife of Flavius Verecundus, based in Westerwood. So we also have a lack of female groups. There's a small amount of them, but they are there. We have, for example, Brica and Januaria, and also Vetia Mansuetia and Claudia Turinalia. There are some fragmentary inscriptions, which is on rib 246 and rib 584, and these, unfortunately, the person who dedicated is unnamed. So this is an issue that we will come across in a lot of inscriptions, that unfortunately, due to the preservation level, they are indeed fragmentary. But we do like to make a note of that, so we have that in our record, and the fact that there was a female who had dedicated. So looking ahead to the geographic distribution of these dedications, there is certainly a regional divide. If you can see on the map on the slide there, a lot of these inscriptions are being erected in northern Britain, so we see a predominant isolation to northern Britain. There are certainly a few in the south and in the middle of England, but mostly we're seeing distribution in northern Britain. The single females and the single groups are exclusively being erected at forts. We can see these along Hadrian's Wall if you look on the map. So a lot of them are indeed being erected at forts. However, does this mean that these females were associated with the army through marriage? We cannot definitely say, especially considering a lot of these inscriptions are not referencing their relationship to a male, which is a good thing for us to look at female agency. Unfortunately, it doesn't give us further information about their private role, so their relationship status. But we cannot say that due to the location, which is close to military forts, they must have been associated with Hadrian's Wall through marriage with an officer or a soldier. So we cannot definitively say that. All we can really say is that they were located in this area. So there is a definite decreased location of settlement sites. I believe there's only 3. So there's a definite decrease of that. The male examples, which on the map is in red, we can see the locations are a marching camp, a settlement, a temple and a fort. So we're seeing representation of every single site you could think of there, really. So that cannot tell us in terms of statistical data where they were more likely to have erected a dedication. But in comparison to females, they were at forts, and there is evidence of women residing just outside the forts, so that may be relating to their habitation, but certainly not necessarily their relationship with the army. So, in terms of looking at Romano-British women's activities, we can see through the inscriptions themselves a reference to religious life. We can see that through an inscription where the female was inspired by a vision. We're looking at women seeking luck, potentially before a journey, or if they was preparing to give birth, or for any activity or task that lay ahead of them, that they were seeking their own welfare. And we can also see that they gave from their own resources. We have one inscription which quotes that she had paid for this inscription herself, which is quite a feat because inscriptions were expensive. The size of the altar would have been expensive, paying for the manpower to get it inscribed. So that in itself, we are seeing status from the female side and an independence for financial means, specifically because the female was did not have a male association on the inscription. So the first one that we have is Rib 760, and it is to Fortune the Preserver, Antonia Stratonis, following a vision. So we're referencing here the experience this woman had, obviously quite a religious experience, that caused her to erect this dedication to Fortuna. And the second one we have is to the mother goddesses, the Fates, for the welfare of Sanctia Gemina. So we're looking at her seeking welfare, for seeking luck, ahead of a specific activity. Unfortunately, we're not given this, but this could have been, quite a usual activity for women prior to engaging with a specific task that lay ahead of them that may have been quite challenging. And then lastly, we have this inscription to the goddess Arie. Varia gave this from her own resources. Arie is fragmentary and is supposed to be Arios, so the Greek version of Ares. And we have Varia, who gave this from her own resources. So we're seeing a lot of sort of independence in her own financial means, which is quite a impressive feat, especially for Romano-British women who are typically dependent on men for their lives and for money and wealth. So looking at the prosopographic data, we're seeing quite a wide varied of ethnic diversity. This is a very unique way for identifying identity within inscriptions. We've got a very sometimes small inscription, and we need to find an approach that will help identify these women at a deeper level. So the first one I'd like to point your attention to is Vata, which is Rib 610. It is a Celtic name derived from Uati, and the meaning of that is seer. Interestingly enough, the deity that she is erecting this altar to is also Celtic, which is Contribus. So the name seer may reference her role within society, may reference her religious role. And if you look below that, we have Rib 630, which is Singatissa, which is again a Celtic name deriving from King Atio. meaning champion. And again, she is erecting an altar to a Celtic deity, Brigantia. So that really tallies in with their Celtic identity. We'll see later that we have a lot of mixtures of their own identity and the deity they're dedicating to. So champion is a very much an other connotation. It's not the meaning of the name that we would expect for a Roman woman, but then these are not Roman women. These are Celtic women living in Roman Britain. And we can also identify ethnic diversity. We can see on the dedicator's name, we have Celtic, Latin, Etruscan, Turkish, and Greek. So we've got a big mixture of ethnicity for these women here. So the Celtic, we have Vata, Syncretisa, Meguna, and Flavia Cunoris. Greek, we have Diodora, Ilia Timo, Karatia, Ressa, and Varia, and we've got one female who is Turkish, Lucilia Sina. So this is really interesting. We've got quite a large amount, specifically Greek, but the Turkish one is actually very interesting because it's coming from the Ionian coastline. An Ionian female in Roman Britain erecting an altar to a Celtic deity. This is pretty amazing in itself, really. We're seeing a lot of that. We're seeing the mixture of identities versus the deity they are erecting an altar to, which is something to think about in terms of identity versus religious life. So the ethnicity and identity, we've identified Celtic, Etruscan, Greek, Ionian, Turkish identities, which you can see portrayed in the pie chart there. The large amount of them are indeed Latin, which again is something that we would expect, but that is contributed by the amalgamation of names. So we would have a Latin first name, and then either Greek or Turkish or Etruscan surname. So that is what is contributing to that quite large percentage. And then Greek, we are seeing at the other level, a large number of Greek women are present in these places. And so, as I said before, we're seeing some otherness through the prosopographic approach. We're seeing their religious role and occupation in society as a seer or a prophetess. Also, we are seeing these Greek inscriptions, some Greek inscriptions tallying up with their Greek identity. This is it's not a huge amount of Greek inscriptions, but they are there and worthy to be of note. And as I said before, we've got the mixture of identities and the retainment of tribal identities. So when I say that, I'm referring to their Celtic identities, and that's very interesting in the data set, that they maybe have a Latin name, a Celtic name, and are erecting an altar to a Roman deity. So we're seeing an amalgamation of identities, and we know this is the case, but this really pushes it home that they had no qualms with introducing many ethnicities and many identities within their own, and by the result of this is that they are benefiting from it. So just to give you a summary, really, the data set that we have, there is a large number of single female dedications, which is a very revelatory result. It's an amazing result, considering we were not expecting so many female dedications in the first place. To see single female dedications without the presence of a male is pretty astounding. We can identify that these inscriptions were isolated to forts and military spaces. Again, that doesn't necessarily mean their association with the army. In most cases, it may have been the case, but we cannot definitively say that. We can see that they were isolated to the north of Britain, specifically at Hadrian's Wall. So the activities these women engaged in, there was a definite evidence for their religious role in society, not just by erecting these altars by themselves, but also their role as a seer or a prophetess. And we can also see that these women, some of these women, at least one that we know of, paid for these dedications by themselves, which illustrates status and wealth. So their identities, there's very much the diversity of ethnic identities. We're seeing a lot of women from a lot of different backgrounds coming across from all over the Roman Empire to be in Britain. So that in itself is quite a result. There was obviously an attraction to Britain at that time. It may have been because it was a new province. And then we're seeing some evidence for otherness through the prosopographic approach. So we are not seeing similarities to Roman women. These were not Roman women. These were women across the Roman Empire settling in Britain. There is a huge difference. And then we can see a retainment of tribal identities. It is clear that it was important that they retain that they did not, as soon as they entered Roman Britain or a Roman province, that they did not discard of their tribal identities. The inscription itself may have been very much Roman through the use of the Latin language, but it was clearly important to either themselves or their families that they retain that they associate strongly with that. So the takeaway from my talk really is that military spaces do not necessarily associate women with a domestic role. We can see occupation in religious roles, and so we cannot deem them necessarily a wife or say prostitutes that were following the Roman army. And these identities, women's identities, were very complex, and through the prosopographic approach, through the analysis of the inscription itself and the geographic distribution, we can delve deeper into their identities and not make assumptions because they were part of the Roman Empire, then they must, as a result, be the same as Roman women. And lastly, women had an active role in the minor British society. They had an active religious role, they had an active role away from the presence of men. So that is my talk. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed what I had to say, and I have my email address up on there, and you can also follow me on X if you'd like to. Thank you very much.